Diana did not shout. She did not confront. She did something far more dangerous inside a palace world, built on smiles, silence, and perfectly controlled appearances. She walked past Camilla without looking at her, and in that single icy moment, everything changed. Before we go deeper into this royal moment, make sure to subscribe, because the truth behind this silent move only gets darker from here. The gathering was supposed to feel perfect. That was the rule inside the royal world. Every smile had a meaning. Every pause was noticed. Every small movement could become a quiet report passed from one room to another. No one had to say they were watching Diana. She already knew. She had lived for years under that kind of stare. People looked at her dress, her face, her hands, her mood. They looked for cracks. They looked for pain. And on this night, many believed she would do what she had always been expected to do: smile, endure, pretend. But Diana arrived with a calm that felt almost dangerous. On the outside, she looked controlled. Graceful, untouchable, yet beneath that calm was a storm built from years of humiliation, betrayal, and emotional exhaustion. She had carried the weight of whispers. She had carried the pain of being watched, while her own heart was breaking. And now, inside a room filled with people who understood royal rules better than ordinary truth, Diana was being asked once again to play her part. Camilla was nearby, close enough to be seen, close enough to matter. She may have expected a polite nod, a tense smile, or even that stiff royal kindness people use when they want to hide a wound. In that world, even false politeness could be used as proof. If Diana smiled, they could say she accepted it. If Diana nodded, they could say she had moved on. If Diana looked at Camilla, even for 1 second, the palace could turn that moment into peace. But Diana gave them nothing. She walked past Camilla completely. No eye contact, no greeting, no soft smile to make others comfortable, no small act of surrender. She moved forward as if Camilla did not exist, and the silence around her became sharper than any spoken insult. It was not loud, but everyone felt it. A room that had survived scandals, cold marriages, and private betrayals suddenly felt frozen by one woman's refusal to pretend. Palace aides exchanged nervous glances. They understood the danger at once. This was not just personal. This was not only one woman ignoring another. This was Diana refusing to obey the unspoken rule that pain must be hidden for the sake of the crown. It was a public rejection dressed as silence, a quiet rebellion in a world terrified of uncontrolled emotion. Charles noticed too late. By the time he understood what had happened, the moment had already escaped him. Diana had drawn a line no one could erase. The room kept moving. The smiles returned. Conversations continued as if nothing had happened. But beneath the polished surface, everyone knew the monarchy had just witnessed something it could not fully control. But what looked like a simple snub was only the first crack in a wall of secrets that had protected Camilla for far too long. Camilla had survived whispers, judgment, and years of being treated like the woman hidden behind palace curtains. But Diana's refusal was different. It did not expose her with words. It exposed her with absence, and that absence humiliated her in front of the very circle she wanted to enter. For a few seconds, Camilla tried to save herself with a smile. It was the kind of smile people use when they know the room has turned against them, but cannot admit it. She lifted her chin, held her face steady, and acted as if nothing had happened. But the damage was already there. The smile did not look strong. It looked trapped. Every person nearby could feel the shift, and in royal circles, feeling was often more dangerous than fact. This was not a normal room. It was a world built on signals. A greeting could mean approval. A handshake could mean protection. A glance could mean alliance. And being ignored, especially by Diana, meant something brutal. It meant being kept outside the story. It meant being allowed near the palace, but not welcomed into its heart. In that one cold moment, Diana had sent a message without raising her voice. Camilla may be tolerated, but Diana would not give her the gift of acceptance. That was what made it so powerful. Diana did not fight. She did not create a scene. She did not give anyone the chance to call her unstable, jealous, or dramatic. She simply walked on, and because she stayed calm, the meaning became even sharper. Her restraint cut deeper than anger ever could. It carried the weight of every private tear, every public smile, every moment she had been expected to suffer quietly, so the royal machine could keep shining. Camilla's embarrassment grew because she had no safe way to answer. If she looked hurt, she would appear weak. If she looked angry, she would appear guilty. If she laughed it off, the laugh would sound false. So she stayed still inside the moment Diana had created for her. Around her, conversations continued, but the tone had changed. People spoke softly now. Their words were polite, but their eyes were busy. Charles tried to step in with forced conversation, the kind meant to smooth over cracks before anyone could point at them. But even he could not pull the room back into order. The damage had already passed from person to person like a secret flame. Guests began to whisper that Diana had done what the palace itself had never dared to do. She had publicly rejected Camilla's place in the royal story. And that was the true humiliation. Not that Diana ignored her, but that everyone understood why. Camilla realized this was not a mistake. It was not nerves. It was not a careless social slip. Diana's silence had been deliberate, precise, and devastating. It left no mark that could be officially punished, yet it wounded everything Camilla wanted most: respect, recognition, and a place that did not feel borrowed. And while the guests whispered about Camilla's wounded pride, the palace was already preparing for something far more dangerous: Diana's refusal to stay silent afterward. By morning, the palace was no longer talking about etiquette. They were talking about damage control. Because Diana's walk past Camilla had become more than gossip, it had become a warning that the Princess of Wales was no longer willing to perform forgiveness for the comfort of the crown. Behind closed doors, the mood changed fast. What had seemed like one silent moment in a crowded room was now being treated like a dangerous leak in the walls of the monarchy. Aides did not speak of it as a simple social slight. They spoke of what it could become: a symbol, a story, a sign that Diana was no longer willing to protect the royal image by hiding her own pain. And that scared them more than any loud argument ever could. The palace knew how to handle scandal when people denied it. It knew how to slow down rumors, soften headlines, and cover cracks with careful words. But Diana had done something harder to control. She had not accused anyone. She had not given them a sentence to correct or a statement to reject. She had only walked past Camilla and left the meaning hanging in the air. That made it powerful. That made it dangerous. The biggest fear was not the walk itself. It was what the walk suggested. Diana had stopped acting like the peaceful royal wife the public was expected to believe in. She had stopped helping the palace sell the story that everything could still be managed with manners and silence. If Diana no longer played along, then people outside the palace might start asking harder questions. They might ask why Camilla was there. They might ask why Charles seemed unable to protect his marriage. They might ask why Diana, who had once tried so hard to belong, now looked like a woman pushed beyond endurance. Charles felt that pressure closing around him. He was not only a husband trapped inside a broken marriage, he was also an heir, and every choice he made was tied to the future of the crown. Public sympathy mattered. Reputation mattered. And Diana, with one silent act, had reminded everyone that she held a kind of power the palace could not give. and could not take away. People felt her pain. They believed her silence. That was the part Charles could not easily fight. Soon, quiet pressure began to move toward Diana. She was expected to smooth things over, a softer greeting next time, a careful word, a polite signal that the storm had passed. But Diana understood what that meant. They were not asking her to heal. They were asking her to perform comfort for the same people who had watched her suffer. And the more they pushed, the more they revealed their fear. The old royal method was beginning to fail. Silence, delay, controlled appearances. These tools had worked for generations, but they were weak against Diana's emotional honesty. She did not need to explain everything for people to understand. She carried the truth in the way she refused to bend. Inside the palace, a hidden divide began to form. Some called Diana reckless. They said she was risking the dignity of the monarchy. Others, more quietly, saw something different. They saw courage. They saw a woman who had been asked to swallow betrayal and smile while doing it. They saw that her calm was not weakness anymore. It was warning. And as the private talks grew colder, one question became impossible to ignore. Had Diana planned that walk all along? Or had something finally pushed her past the line? The answer was darker than anyone outside those walls knew. Because Diana's refusal had not appeared from nowhere. It had been building through whispers, small insults, and one private remark that cut too deep to forget. And the insult that pushed Diana over the edge was not spoken in public, it was buried inside a private conversation the palace never wanted repeated. Every royal explosion begins with something small. A sentence, a glance, a name said the wrong way. For Diana, the breaking point was not a headline or a photograph. It was a private remark that made her realize Camilla was no longer hiding in the shadows. The words reached Diana quietly, the way the most painful things often did inside palace life. They did not come with a public announcement. They did not arrive as a direct insult she could answer. They came through the hidden paths of royal whispers, through careful voices and half-finished sentences, until the meaning became clear. Camilla, it seemed, no longer felt like a secret pushed to the edge of Charles's world. She felt secure. She felt protected. She felt close enough to him that Diana's pain was beginning to look, to some people, like a problem that needed to be managed. That was what cut deepest. Diana had faced gossip before. She had faced cold rooms, forced smiles, and the terrible loneliness of being surrounded by people who knew more than they admitted. But this remark carried a different kind of cruelty. It suggested that her heartbreak had become inconvenient. Not tragic, not unfair, just inconvenient. As if her tears were a disturbance, as if her dignity was slowing down a story others had already decided to rewrite. In that moment, Diana understood something that changed everything. The palace's silence was not neutral. It was not kindness. It was not wisdom. It was protection for everyone except her. Every time no one spoke, Camilla grew safer. Every time people looked away, Charles escaped harder questions. Every time Diana was asked to remain graceful, the truth was pushed further into the dark. And Diana knew how dangerous politeness could be. A small nod could be twisted into forgiveness. A greeting could be called acceptance. A smile could be offered to the public as proof that the wound had closed. The palace did not need Diana to be happy. It only needed her to look calm enough for everyone else to feel comfortable. So when she walked past Camilla, it was not petty revenge. It was self-protection. It was Diana refusing to hand over one more piece of herself to a system that had taken too much already. She wanted to stay dignified. She wanted to rise above the pain. But she also knew that pretending had become its own kind of prison. If she kept acting like nothing was broken, then the palace would keep using her silence as a curtain. That was the battle inside her. Be graceful, but not erased. Be calm, but not used. Be royal, but still human. And in the end, Diana chose the one language the royal machine could not rewrite. She chose absence. She chose not to look. She chose not to bless what had wounded her. But that choice came with a cost. Because silence inside a palace is never empty. It grows. It travels. It threatens people who survive by controlling meaning. Diana had made her pain visible without saying a word, and now the consequences were moving toward her from every side. But Diana was not the only one making calculations. Because across the room, Charles began to understand that his future had just collided with Diana's truth. Charles had been raised to believe the crown could survive anything if appearances were preserved. But Diana's silent rejection exposed a terrifying weakness. The palace could control ceremonies, seating plans, and official statements, but it could not control what people felt when they saw Diana wounded and unafraid. That was what made the moment so dangerous for him. It was not only that Diana had ignored Camilla. It was that she had done it with calm. She had not looked broken. She had not looked confused. She had looked like a woman who finally understood her own power. And Charles knew, perhaps better than anyone, that Diana's power did not come from titles or old rules. It came from the way people saw her pain and believed it. For years, the palace had trusted protocol to keep the story in place. There were rules for greetings, rules for seating, rules for how royal faces should look when the heart was falling apart. But Diana had stepped outside those rules without making a scene. She had shown the room that the old language no longer held her. And once that happened, Charles could feel the danger growing around him. His anger was real, but so was his fear. He knew Camilla's future place depended on Diana's silence. If Diana acted polite, Camilla could slowly be softened in the eyes of society. If Diana smiled, people could pretend the wound was healing. But if Diana refused to acknowledge her, then Camilla remained exposed. Not as a future accepted figure, but as the woman Diana would not bless. That truth cornered Charles. He was not simply a man caught between two women. He was the heir to a throne, and every private choice carried public weight. His loyalty to Camilla pulled him one way. His duty to the crown pulled him another. And underneath both was a bitter resentment he could not easily admit. Diana had the sympathy he needed, and he could not command it from her. Palace advisors warned him not to confront her too sharply. A direct fight could make Diana look even more wounded, and the public would not forgive that easily. But Charles wanted the matter contained before it became legend. He wanted the room to forget. He wanted the whispers to fade. He wanted Diana to understand that her silence had consequences. Yet Diana refused to apologize. She knew what an apology would become. It would turn her boundary into bad behavior. It would make her pain look like rudeness. It would allow the palace to say the problem was not betrayal, but Diana's reaction to it. And she would not give them that gift. So the pressure shifted. If Diana could not be made to apologize, then perhaps she could be managed. Quiet conversations began around whether she should be kept away from certain gatherings, certain circles, certain moments where her presence might become unpredictable. The palace did not call it punishment. It called it protection. But Diana understood the difference. Protection was offered to those valued. Control was placed on those feared. And the more they tried to close the walls around her, the more determined she became not to disappear. She had spent too long being asked to smile through suffering. Now even her silence was being treated like a threat. That told her everything. Then, the tension grew darker. Someone, somewhere inside that guarded world, began to suggest that Diana's behavior might affect more than invitations. It could touch privileges. traditions, access, the quiet benefits of royal belonging, the things never fully explained to the public but deeply understood inside palace life. Suddenly, this was no longer just about love, betrayal, or Camilla's wounded pride. It was about status. It was about inheritance. It was about who had the right to stand near power and who could be slowly pushed away from it. Charles had thought the crown could protect him, but Diana's truth had slipped past the guards, past the polished statements, past the old rules. And now, the battle had changed shape. And once the conflict moved from personal betrayal to royal control, the next battle was no longer fought in the ballroom, it was fought in the hidden language of jewels, invitations, and access. In the royal world, jewels are never just jewels. They are approval, punishment, inheritance, and power disguised as beauty. After Diana walked past Camilla, the palace did not need to shout its warning. It could send a message with a necklace, a tiara, or a locked vault. That was when the fight moved into a colder place. No one had to raise a voice. No one had to admit there was a plan. Inside royal life, power often arrived quietly, hidden in tradition. A missing invitation could sting more than an insult. A changed seating plan could speak louder than a letter. And a jewel, offered or withheld, could tell the whole room who was favored and who was being slowly pushed away. Diana understood this language. She had learned it through pain. She knew that jewels were not only beautiful objects placed around a neck or pinned near the heart. They were signs. They told people who belonged. They told the world who had been accepted by the family, who had been trusted with history, and who was allowed to carry the shine of the crown. To the public, a tiara might look like glamour. To Diana, it could feel like a verdict. After her silent rejection of Camilla, rumors began to move through the palace air. Certain pieces once linked to Diana might not be offered as easily. Some could be kept away. Others could be saved for a different future. Nothing was said openly, because open punishment would have looked cruel. But royal punishment did not need to be open. It could be wrapped in rules, explained as tradition, and hidden behind locked doors. For Diana, this felt like a deeper betrayal. Her marriage had already been wounded. Her private life had already been turned into something people whispered about. But now it seemed her place in royal history could also be touched. The palace was not only asking her to accept pain, it was asking her to watch the symbols around that pain be rearranged. Piece by piece, the story could be rewritten until Camilla appeared less like a secret and more like someone being prepared for acceptance. That was the danger. Camilla's future depended on more than Charles's affection. It depended on symbols, a greeting, a seat, a jewel, a public sign that she was no longer outside the royal circle, and Diana saw exactly what that meant. If Camilla could be slowly dressed in legitimacy, then Diana's suffering could be softened, hidden, and finally treated as something the monarchy had survived. But Diana's image was not so easy to control. The more the palace tried to manage her, the stronger her hold on the public became. People saw beauty in her strength, but they also felt the sadness beneath it. They saw a woman surrounded by glitter, yet starving for honesty. That contrast was powerful. It made every jewel look heavier. It made every smile feel more painful. Aides feared what would happen if Diana ever spoke plainly about this hidden world. If she explained what jewels really meant, the public might stop seeing them as harmless treasures. They might see them as tools of reward and rejection. They might understand the cruelty behind the glamour. And once people understood that, the palace would lose one of its oldest shields. Still, one piece carried more danger than the rest. It was not only valuable, it was emotional. Its meaning had been discussed in quiet corners, behind careful faces, by people who knew exactly what it could suggest if it ever moved from one woman's story into another's. And if Diana learned the full truth, the scandal would no longer be about one cold walk past Camilla. But the most dangerous jewel in this story was not the one worn in public, it was the one whose meaning had been quietly discussed behind palace doors. There was one piece, whispered about more than displayed, that carried the weight of rivalry, memory, and royal permission. Diana knew its meaning. Camilla wanted what it represented, and the palace feared that if the public understood its symbolism, sympathy would turn into outrage overnight. The jewel itself was not dangerous because of its shine. It was dangerous because of what people believed it meant. In the royal world, a piece like that could speak for the whole institution. It could say, "This woman is accepted. This woman has been forgiven. This woman is no longer outside the gates." And that was why the whispers around it felt so heavy. It was not just about who might wear it. It was about whose story would be lifted up, and whose pain would be pushed into the dark. Diana understood that very clearly. She had learned, through years of quiet wounds, that royal symbols were never innocent. A jewel could look beautiful to the public, but inside the palace, it could carry a sharp message. It could mark power. It could mark approval. It could even mark replacement. And when Diana allegedly heard that discussions had taken place about Camilla one day being allowed near symbols once tied to Diana's own place, something inside her hardened. Because this was no longer only about a broken marriage. This was about history. To Diana, the idea felt almost unbearable. If Camilla was slowly brought closer to these symbols, then the palace was not simply accepting Charles's choices. It was preparing to rewrite the memory of what Diana had lived through. The pain, the loneliness, the years of being expected to smile while her heart was being bruised, could all be softened by tradition. The public might be asked to see Camilla not as the woman Diana refused to acknowledge, but as someone polished by time, jewels, and royal approval. That was why Diana's walk past Camilla now looked different. It was not just a cold moment in a crowded room. It was a warning shot, a silent line before a much larger fight. Diana had refused to bless Camilla with a glance, because she understood the danger of giving even one small sign of acceptance. In palace hands, a glance could become peace. A smile could become forgiveness. Silence could become surrender if Diana did not control it herself. Camilla's desire for recognition was human, but it was also explosive. She wanted to step out of the shadows. She wanted the room to stop treating her like a secret. But every symbol she came closer to seemed to cost Diana something. A little dignity, a little history, a little space in the story she had suffered to survive. Inside the palace, the question grew sharper. Was Diana too emotionally powerful to challenge directly? Some feared that pushing her would only make her stronger in the eyes of the public. Others believed she had to be managed before her silence became a weapon no one could disarm. Charles understood the risk most of all. Diana's silence no longer felt like obedience. It felt like strategy. And Diana could feel it too. The institution wanted her grace, but not her truth. It wanted her calm, but not her pain. It wanted her to stand aside while others decided what her suffering would mean. So the suspense became unbearable. Would she speak? Would she expose the private meaning behind the jewel? Or would she choose something quieter, colder, and far more devastating? The palace waited for an outburst. Camilla waited for a crack. Charles waited for a sign that Diana could still be contained. But Diana had learned from the very system trying to control her. The most powerful moves were not always loud. Sometimes they arrived softly, almost politely, and changed everything before anyone could stop them. And when Diana finally made that move, it did not come through a speech, a scandal, or a confrontation, it came through one decision that left the palace stunned. Everyone expected Diana to break. Some expected tears, others expected rage. But Diana chose something far more unforgettable. She transformed humiliation into control, silence into accusation, and rejection into a royal moment so powerful that even those who disliked her could not look away. By then, the palace was waiting for Diana to make a mistake. That was what many people expected from a woman under pressure. They thought pain would make her careless. They thought betrayal would push her into words that could be used against her. If she shouted, they could call her unstable. If she accused, they could call her bitter. If she cried in the wrong room, they could say she was too emotional for the cold world she had married into. But Diana did not give them the ending they wanted. She stayed calm, and that calm became her strongest weapon. Instead of apologizing for walking past Camilla, Diana allowed the moment to stand. She did not rush to soften it. She did not offer a polite explanation to protect the palace from discomfort. She understood that one apology could destroy everything her silence had said. It would turn her boundary into bad manners. It would let the palace pretend the real problem was not betrayal, secrecy, or emotional cruelty, but Diana's refusal to smile through it. So she gave them nothing to edit. That was what stunned the palace most. Diana had learned their own game. For years, the monarchy had survived by saying less, showing less, and letting silence do the work. Now Diana was using silence too, but not to protect the crown. She was using it to protect herself. And suddenly, the same tool that had hidden her pain was now exposing the people who expected her to hide it forever. Camilla may have wanted recognition. Charles may have wanted peace. The palace may have wanted order. But Diana wanted something they had never fully given her: the right to be wounded without being blamed for the wound. And that was why her final decision carried so much force. She refused to help them turn Camilla's rise into a clean, simple story. She refused to let royal jewels, secret vaults, private talks, and quiet invitations erase what had happened to her heart. If Camilla was going to be accepted, Diana would not be the one to make it easy. If the palace wanted to rewrite the story, it would have to do so without her blessing. The whispers grew sharper. Some said Diana was becoming difficult. Others said she was finally becoming free. But the public felt something deeper. They saw a woman surrounded by titles, tradition, and glittering symbols, yet fighting for something painfully human. Respect, truth, a place in her own story. That was the contrast that made her unforgettable. Camilla may have been moving closer to royal acceptance, but Diana was moving closer to something even more powerful: emotional victory. Not the kind written in palace records, not the kind approved by advisors. The kind people remember because it feels true. Charles understood it too. He had once believed the crown could shield him from the emotional cost of his choices. But Diana's silence proved otherwise. Her refusal followed him. It followed Camilla. It followed every polished room where people pretended not to notice the cracks. The palace could lock jewels away. It could manage guest lists. It could control ceremonies. But it could not lock away the meaning of what Diana had done. She had walked past Camilla once. Just once. But the echo of that choice grew larger than the moment itself. It became a symbol of every time Diana had been asked to make others comfortable, while she suffered. It became proof that even in a world built on obedience, one woman could still say no without speaking. And in the end, that was the twist no one expected. Diana did not need a speech. She did not need a scandal. She did not need to reveal every secret hidden behind palace doors. Her power came from refusing to perform peace where there had been pain. The monarchy wanted the room to forget. Camilla wanted the wound to close. Charles wanted control to return. But Diana had already changed the story. With one cold walk, one missing glance, and one silence they could not rewrite, she turned humiliation into strength. And that is why one quiet walk through a glittering royal room became more dangerous than any public accusation. Because Diana did not need to destroy the illusion with words, she only had to stop pretending it was real. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this royal story, make sure to subscribe for more dramatic documentaries about power, secrets, and the hidden battles behind the palace walls.